Nearly every time that women speak about feminism or equal rights, a man will bring up the draft. He'll say, well, if women want equal rights, then you're not free from the draft. You should have to fight wars too. For the past 20 years, it's been little more than a joke. The United States is separate from any immediate dangers, and besides our meddling in foreign affairs, few circumstances would call for military action that required reinstating a draft. Now, in the light of what's happening in Ukraine, the jokes are coming back in full force. Men joking about dodging the draft, and women claiming that they would prefer to revert to housewives to avoid it, and these are all Americans, of course, making these jokes. The real people that Russia's invasion affects are those across the ocean in Ukraine. See, it's real easy to make light of a situation that doesn't affect you. When you only receive news through a screen, it feels less real. And even if you really want to care, it's difficult to conceive what exactly this means. I'll leave the discussion for worldwide implications to those who are more aware of the relationships between countries and the implications of their actions. What I want to talk about specifically is how the war in Ukraine affects women. Rape follows war just as much as death itself does. It is a common tool of war. It is so common that it is often overlooked and ignored when discussing the effects of war. It is assumed but never addressed. From the comfort woman forced into prostitution in World War II by Japan, back to antiquity, where myths of Achilles and Patroclus detail that on the Isle of Skyros, Achilles fell desperately in love with Diadema before raping her in a sacred grove and begetting his only son. Rape has always been a weapon of war. There are a myriad of examples in the countries that are embroiled in conflict through intervention from the West, but now it is finally reaching a country where there is a chance of better documentation. For Ukrainian women, this is an entirely too real threat. Already, there are rumors of Russian soldiers raping Ukrainian women. Evidently, the rest of the world expects much of the same, given that Ukrainian woman is a trending term on Pornhub, where there is now a category of brutalizations uploaded by Russian soldiers. Increasing numbers of Ukrainian women will endure sexual violence wielded as a weapon of war in the wake of Russia's invasion of the country. Leading human rights organizations told The Independent that women are likely to be among those hardest hit by Russia's full-scale invasion, noting that they have already suffered badly during the bloody 8-year conflict between Russian-backed rebels and the separatist east of Ukraine. Steve Crawshaw, director of policy at the Freedom from Torture, told The Independent Russia's track record meant he envisioned torture and human rights violations will rise in Ukraine in the wake of Russia's escalation. If Russia wins, domestic violence was decriminalized in 2017. Men with PTSD and survivors of conflict are notorious for their violence against their spouses, and if Russia continues occupation of Ukraine, they will be subject to the same lack of protections. More immediately, there remains a danger of trafficking due to the dire situation that many women have been placed in. Domestic violence and street harassment have already spiked, and female refugees are falling victim to pimps and traffickers. Official channels, the police, hospitals, and legal systems won't help them. Many of these women who have fled from their homes with little to their names will be pressed into sexual slavery, most likely in Germany where prostitution is legal. Despite the concept that doing so help prevent trafficking, many of the women in Germany's mega brothels cannot even name where they are if they can speak the language at all. The increased supply has lowered the cost for rape and has made for horrible conditions. We observe a reduction in the pay rate for women. 30 euros for sexual intercourse, while they must pay around 160 euros for a room and 25 in euro taxes per day. So they have to serve 6 men before they start earning money. In the streets, it starts as low as 5 euros. The working conditions have become disastrous. They developed Vertungsboxen, which means things that are getting done in a box, like cow boxes without water, toilets, nothing. Violence against women became a structural violence. It means that society and the institutions, the political, educational, executive, and adjudicative authority are not questioning it anymore. It is internalized. The police inspectors say themselves that they feel helpless. Manfred Paulus, a criminal inspector who worked for years in this field, says that Germany with this law became an El Dorado for traffickers, pimps, and brothel owners. The women who come from abroad and work in the red light district don't get to know the Germany that the Germans know and appreciate. No, they are prisoners of a parallel society that is highly criminal. It is estimated that 1.2 million men buy sex every day. 18% are regular consumers, 80% have been in a brothel. Under these conditions, no German woman sees herself as capable of doing this work. The makeup of women in prostitution has changed. With the opening of Europe to the east, women come from the poorest regions of Europe, Romania, Bulgaria, and it's often minorities like the Roma who live in extreme poverty. Today, around 95% come from other countries. It has become a prostitution of poverty. In the words of Myers Power, a former prostitute, there is a fundamental societal problem. Prostitutes are talked about almost like American Pie. They're the cocktail party joke. They always say they're the oldest profession, but we're not. We're the oldest form of slavery, the oldest oppression. But there's also a sense of entitlement that is inculcated in men. The very idea that they have the right to buy women's bodies. They feel entitled to go to strip clubs and snatch up porn, and they can do this because they have been told it's their right as males. But it's not their right. So we start early when they are children. We have to raise young boys to say, if you buy another human being, you're actually doing an act against nature. Even in men overseas, far away from the conflict at hand, there is an attitude of triviality regarding the abuse these women will likely face. Many men have found the conflict in Ukraine to create a perfect condition for manipulating women into giving them sex. From the Redditors who make jokes about helping poor Ukrainian women, to the heads of state and politicians who note their desire to only help attractive Ukrainian women with obvious insinuation. This reflects the objectification of Eastern European descent, evident in the thriving mail-order bride industry, and reveals that the coming horrors are nothing new. They are simply the inevitable conclusion of misogyny run rampant, where the oppression and abuse of women is easily overlooked when it benefits men to do so. I worry for our sisters in Ukraine, both for the invaders they run from and for the men they run to in the countries who have offered to host them. Furthermore, there are very few choices for Ukrainians to escape the war, and what choices they do have all have various drawbacks. To Western Europe, where there is a risk of trafficking, to stay where Russian artillery or soldiers may cause harm, to flee via Russia's evacuation corridors, which allow safe passage to Belarus or Russia only, while evacuation to Poland and other EU countries may still be at risk of death by Russian artillery. There are no easy answers here, and I suspect that the full extent of criminality allowed to pass by unnoticed due to the war will not be revealed for years to come. There are many things to critique about Western coverage of the war. There is rampant racism and double standards with how this is treated versus other conflicts. Russia itself faces sanctions that will lead to the deaths of civilians who do not support the war and risk their freedom by protesting against it. But what I am most concerned about is the women who will suffer because of this and the inevitable silencing of their voices when it occurs. Just as the camp brothels during the Holocaust were ignored for years, I fear that this too will be brushed aside, or worse, implicitly allowed to exist as a sad but inevitable side effect of war. Thank you, dear viewers, for listening to this one. This is a very dark topic, and it is something that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about. Yes, we've been talking about the Ukraine for the past couple weeks, but very few talk about what it means on an individual level. There's this weird, false, caring activism thing where a lot of young people will post, they'll post the post on Twitter and Instagram, but they don't really read deeper than what those infographics on those same sites tell them. And it leaves with this lack of understanding of what this really means for the individuals who are trapped in this conflict. But I digress. I sincerely hope that we're able to at least document what happens and some of these women will be able to escape this safely and unharmed. But this, dear viewers, is where we part. So please leave a comment down below, questions, concerns, anything you want me to talk about. You know that I respond to just about every comment, given that you are polite. And I will see you guys next time. Bye.